Hi, I'm Nina Melendez, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, a show about the world of work and our place in it. One of the byproducts of the Roe v. Wade reversal was a renewed concern about digital privacy. How easily can entities access your data, i.e., how much you search online, what those searches are, where you go, where you shop, and how can you protect yourself from being digitally surveilled without totally going offline? Well, lucky for us, we have just a guest to help us today. Joining me now is Tony Ascombe. He is Chief Security Evangelist at ESET, a software development company. He is also a board member at the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Prior to that, he was VP of Compliance at AVG and has over 20 years of experience in security, privacy, and compliance. Tony, welcome.
Hi, good to be here, Nina.
Great to see you, Tony. So, we know corporations mine data for advertising, and I want to get into that. But first, on average, how much data would you say that the average American leaks on any given day?
Well, I think that really depends on each and every person's usage, doesn't it? I mean, how did you get to work this morning? Was it that you used Google Maps to use a different route, or were you going somewhere different? What is it you're searching for? Are you looking for a vacation, or did you do any email yesterday? I think that's a really difficult question to ask because it really depends upon our usage. But it's a considerable amount. If you take your average day that, maybe you've used Google Maps, maybe you've looked up where to get lunch, maybe you've streamed some different TV, maybe you've watched some YouTube videos. There's an awful lot of data being collected about us every day. Putting a number on that, I think, is really tough, though.
And who has all this data? And what are they doing with all this data that they've collected?
Well, there's the obvious people in there, isn't there? There's the Facebooks and the Googles and the people that we'd expect to kind of have that data. But if you think about it, we use an economy on the internet that is fairly free. I mean, if you think about all the apps and the services you start to use, whether you're searching, whether you're using social media, or whatever it is you might be doing, most of what we do, we don't pay for. So how are those companies making money? Well, there's primarily two different methods. There's one that they're providing advertising, or two, they're collecting data on us and profiling. A lot of that may well be for advertising purposes, or they may well be using that data in some other way to monetize. So, we have to think about how the services we use and how that's being used and how those companies make money. So the next time you're downloading some app onto your phone to play the latest game, think about how does that company monetize? What is it they might be doing to make money? Their developers need paying. So that's primarily who's collecting the data, the people whose services we use for free.
And would you say that app tracking is pretty accurate? Has the technology advanced to the extent that it's quite accurate with what you search and what you do online?
Well, it depends on what the app is collecting, of course. And I'll give you an example, Nina. I mean, if you used, for example, Google Maps to come to work this morning, how do people think the line goes red on the road where the traffic is in front of you? There's no sensor in the street other than the sensor that is you. It's the people in the cars that are the sensor that's collecting that data that's showing that they're not moving. So how accurate is it? Well, actually, we rely on it in something like location in that way every day. If we look at other types of app where actually something might be offering us things, whether it's on a laptop or whether it's an app on a mobile phone, if we've given an app permission to look at our location, for example, GPS, or whether we've given it the right to know our IP address, or how is it tracking us? If it's GPS, it's probably pretty accurate. And if we've given it access to know our browsing history on a laptop, then something's pretty accurate there too, of exactly what we're doing. So it really depends how you're doing it and what permissions you've given the app and what data that it is that they're extracting from that.
I want to talk about those permissions and how we can protect ourselves. Let me just stop for a moment and say hi to some of our members who are joining us. We've got Cody from Canada, Yolanda from Texas, Clement from Cameroon, and Cheryl from North Carolina. Thanks for joining. If you have any questions for Tony, put them in the stream and we'll get those answered for you. Tony, some companies will say that they don't sell our data. is that how trustworthy is that? Can we actually trust it when we get that notice that says, oh, we don't sell your data, you can put all that info in here?
Well, firstly, there's of course selling data and sharing data. A company
Mm,
might not sell it, but they might share it. But what's in a privacy policy, should be legally, it should stand up legally. And the world, pretty much changed in the last 5 years because privacy legislation came in around the world. So in Europe, you've got GDPR. Where I'm based in California, we've got CCPA, and there's different pieces of privacy legislation all over the US and, more to the point, all over the world. In fact, I think last time I looked, there was over 100 different countries with different levels of privacy legislation. And companies will get taken to task in some of those countries if their privacy policy is saying one thing and they're actually doing another thing. And we've seen that. Regulators aren't scared of going after them. And here in California, CCPA didn't have a regulatory body, but it's about to, there's one in process with CPRA, so the new legislation that's coming in at the end of the year. So there are different, companies have to take it seriously. If we read the privacy policy, it says they're not sharing. It probably means they're not sharing or selling. However, I will caveat that and turn and say, some companies sell data anonymized, and we need to understand the context of what it means if somebody's selling anonymized data, i.e. they've taken all the personal identifiers out. And if anybody's listening that's a privacy advocate, we all know that really means pseudo-anonymized, because if it's still got zip code in there and there's only 2 houses in a zip code, I can probably identify you. So it really depends on some of that data, but think about who might be purchasing. So for example, if a hedge fund manager purchases anonymized data to find out whether Amazon has more people shopping on it in the run up to Christmas, so that the hedge fund manager can try and predict their financial results at the end of a quarter, is that damaging me, or is that helping the fund manager? I think we need context on what it is they're selling and what it is used for.
Is it safer or less safer if they're selling versus sharing, or does it not matter?
I think some companies hide sharing behind saying we don't sell, but some companies share. So I think that's just a play on words that companies sometimes hide behind. But I think if they're sharing or selling, to me, that's pretty much the same thing. And I'm sure you agree, Nina.
And would you say it's the same as far as the anonymity goes? If it's and you said it's like pseudo anonymous because there are still identifiers with our data. Is it like less bad if it's anonymous or pseudo anonymous than if it isn't, in your opinion?
I mean, there's a big difference, isn't there, between me turning around and saying, well, 10 people that live in this city searched for F-150 trucks, than me turning around and saying these 10 people specifically with their identities and their address, their IP address, maybe an email address, searched for F-150 trucks. There's personal data, and then there's generic data that, like I say, is pseudo-anonymized. It's not truly anonymized, because sometimes you could still identify the person from it.
So there have been some cases in recent years, and I'm thinking of the Grindr case, where Grindr shared its location data with advertisers, and it resulted in the outing of a Catholic priest. Do companies have duty of care if they do violate your privacy?
That's a good question. I think that one's probably actually beyond where I can answer, Nina. But to me, companies need to be responsible with the data that they're holding. So, for example, if somebody is holding sensitive data, such as such as the example you just gave, or if somebody is holding data about, for example, if somebody in a family household looks up pregnancy test kits, to me, then displaying advertising around pregnancy tests where you don't know whether the person was on a family machine, whether other members of the family have it, there's a responsibility of actually maybe not advertising some of the products related to the search without actually understanding you're only displaying them to the person that searched. So I think there's a responsibility, a duty of care in there.
And maybe this is another toughie for you, but I'm going to throw it your way anyways, Tony. How likely are we to get a nationwide privacy law enacted anytime soon?
Well, the good thing is we are
Hmm.
seeing certain states put in very specific privacy laws. So as those privacy laws get put in place, that does actually help nationally. And it also, if you look at some of the privacy legislation, so for example, California's privacy legislation is based on your residence. So regardless of where the resident is when they're searching or when they're doing something, it has to apply. Whereas GDPR in Europe, if you visit Europe, actually you're covered by GDPR because you're seen as being located there at the time you were actually activating. Now, the point behind that is with these different pieces of legislation covering people in different ways, it means actually some of this privacy legislation has to be applied all across the board. So to a certain degree, you're getting a much higher base level of privacy legislation than we've had before. But should there be better federal privacy legislation? Yeah, I think so. But we have also seen, and I give credit to, you've seen the FTC take task over some bad apps that are listed in app stores. So, for example, the example a lot of people use is flashlight apps that were stripping your contacts off your phone and things like that. So you've seen the FTC step up and implement privacy rules and regulation at that federal level as well. But we should see some better privacy legislation, and I hope we do see.
I actually have a great question from our member Sarah, who's asking, has GDPR or any other legislation done very much to simplify the language of privacy policies? Does the average person have any better idea what they're giving up than they did several years ago? Great question from Sarah. Tony, what do you think?
I was going to say that's an excellent question,
Yeah.
Sarah, because I can show you an example of a privacy policy that's 6,000 words, and I can show you one that's 1,000 words and has put it
I
in.
mean, who reads these things?
Right.
That's like, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I do.
And that's why you're on the show.
Right. But it's a great question. And there have been moves in some industry segments and nonprofits to actually simplify privacy policies and put them in text that actually everybody can understand. But there's certain parts of the privacy policy that I think are legal, and there's certain parts that we need to understand. So, what data is being collected? How long are you going to store it? What are you going to use it for? And is it being shared with somebody else? And to me, if you can put those key elements right at the top of a privacy policy so that everybody can go there and read just the first 10 bullet points and understand what's actually happening, you can put all the rest of the legal stuff underneath, but just don't hide anything in it. But I think, I'd love to see some sort of standard here. I think we're a long way off of seeing that standard. I think it's down to individual companies, and some companies do it well. And unfortunately, some companies hide all sorts of things in very long legal text.
Let's say hi to some more members who are joining us from all over the world. We've got Zila from Vienna. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Zila from Vienna, Deanna from Chicago, Ahmad from Canada, and Joanne from New York City. And that great question from Emily, who's joining us, which was one of mine. What is something that we as users can do today to better protect our data? Great question, Emily.
Well, firstly, Emily, you're doing one of the things that you can do already. You're engaging in a discussion around your privacy. So that is the number one, is actually getting people to step up and turn and say, I need to think about this. I need to do something more. So one is understanding the trade. And when I say a trade, we use these free services on the internet, and these companies need to make money somehow. It's an understanding of what data is being collected against what service it is that I'm actually using. So if somebody is collecting my location data when I use their app, or they're collecting what I'm browsing for, my shopping, when I'm using their app, but I get to use their app for free, and this is the service they provide me, and that's a good trade-off in my view, then I'd be happy to use that app. However, I pick up another app and they're after something else, they want to share my data with some other third party, then I don't want to. So engaging in the conversation and understanding where your line in the sand is, I think is really important. So understand what it is you're willing to trade, i.e. what data of yours you're willing to trade against the service you've got. And then, of course, you can set privacy settings and you can set permissions based on where that line in the sand is. And all tech companies and all apps typically have the ability to actually set those privacy settings, but we don't engage with them frequently enough. Not enough people actually take a positive action to go and actually track what is happening with their privacy and who's using it, or more to the point, actually controlling it.
Tony, is it safe to assume that if you're paying for the app, then you're less likely to be making the trade-off than if you're not paying for the app?
I would not make that assumption.
Okay.
I would still go and read the permissions that the app takes. But however, I think as a business model, you can certainly to a certain degree say if you're paying for an app, I wouldn't expect somebody to be selling my data or sharing my data with a third party, or maybe even using my data for advertising purposes. So it would lower my base, my line in the sand with that app. In fact, I probably wouldn't use it if they were doing some of those things and I was paying for the app.
Which apps would you say collect the most data or shares the most data? If you could give us let's say, what are the apps that Tony stays away from?
Well, it's the advertising networks that collect the most data. So, for example, we've all seen this. I mean, I'm sure, Nina, you've been on to a website, searched for something, and then all day long you see ads for whatever it was you searched for.
And actually, and are they listening? Because sometimes I'll talk about a thing and I won't search it, and then suddenly I'm getting ads for it, and I'm like, how did they know?
I think there's an element of we don't understand, firstly, what ads we were seeing before. So, for example, if you and I sat here and talked about maybe going to Hawaii in 2 weeks' time, and then one of us looks for flights to one of the Hawaiian Islands, and then suddenly I start getting all these ads for hotels. Was it our conversation, or was it the fact I searched for flights? Or was it that actually I've been saying that I want to go to Hawaii in social media for the last 2 years? And somebody was picking it up from there. And was I already seeing the Hawaiian apps before you and I had the conversation, but just didn't?
So you're only noticing them now.
Right.
Right.
I think this theory that somebody's listening to us probably isn't really the case. I think there's already enough data collected about us that somebody doesn't need to listen to us.
I'm getting my producer who's writing in all caps. They're listening to us. Siri is always listening. Just a couple comments from our members. Dolores says data pirates are very adept at finding ways to circumvent safeguards. Anita is saying it's shocking how they always find a way to get through to people's data. Tony, is total anonymity possible?
You mean after this interview, do I head off into the woods with my tin hat on?
Yes,
nobody's ever going.
That's what I want to do right now.
Well,
unplug entirely. Yeah.
Let me tell you, like I say, it's about a trade. I don't think there's a possibility if you're using an online service to be completely anonymous. And there's, of course, if you're whatever it is you're doing online, some companies may have a legal responsibility to collect some of the data around what you're doing and to hold that data for legal purposes. So, for example, if you transact with somebody, they will have to have that purchase or that transaction data probably held for a certain period of time for financial legislation. So can you be truly anonymous? No, I don't think so. It's about understanding what it is you're giving up as well. And one tip I often give people is why are we so honest? When somebody sends me something and asks me to fill out a form, why is it I always tell the form that it's me? Why can't I just have a secondary email address and put in that secondary email address that's got nothing to do with me? Of course, it doesn't stop advertising networks, knowing it came from my IP address and et cetera, but we can limit the amount of data that we share and with who we share that data.
That is such a great, that's such a great tip. Like, why are we so honest? Date of birth, I mean, or whatever it is. Yeah. I was joking about going to the woods with my tin hat, but it does make me a little bit suspicious about technology. But is that the takeaway? Like, what do you want folks to walk away with from this conversation, Tony?
The big one for me, Nina, is actually engagement with the privacy conversation. There, as a cybersecurity person and privacy person, you often hear several, people turn around and say, it's too late. Everybody knows everything about me already. Well, firstly, that's not the right attitude, but also to have that engagement. When was the last time you went into your social media accounts and looked at the privacy settings? Have you looked at, for example, in Facebook's off Facebook activity, settings, and have you gone and monitored those? And that's really what I'd like to see people take away from this, is to actually spend 30 minutes with a machine in front of you to do only one task, and that's to go through the apps you use frequently, whether it's social media, whether it's shopping sites, whatever it might be. Go through and look at the apps on your phone as well, look at the permissions, look at how you can lock down, make sure you're comfortable with what it is you're sharing. And that would be a leap forward.
Tony, unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much for joining us here on LinkedIn News Live and sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Nina.
That was Tony Ascombe. He's Chief Security Evangelist at ESET. And thanks everyone for your comments. Apologies that we couldn't get to everyone. You can continue the conversation here on the stream, or you can check out some of our other great stories to the right of your feed. Or of course, if you're on mobile, you can click into the search box. Next Monday, we are talking about the uncertainty that happens at our jobs and our lives, how to get over the fear of the unknown, especially these days when there is just unpredictable all around the corner at all times. You won't want to miss that conversation next Monday at 3 p.m. I'm Nina Melendez. Thank you for watching LinkedIn News Live.